Okay, we are live.
Thank you all. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We are at our Study Committee on Independent Police Oversight Commission meeting here Monday, April 26, 2021 at 6 p.m. Can we go ahead and do roll call, please, Diane?
Kathy Boyle.
Kathy Boyle attending via Zoom from East Lansing, Ingham County, Michigan.
Sade Colwood.
Sade Colwood attending virtually from Douglas, Massachusetts, Worcester County.
Kelly Ellsworth Etchison.
Kelly Ellsworth Etchison attending virtually from East Lansing, Michigan, Ingham County.
Noel Garcia Jr.
Good evening, Noel Garcia Jr. attending virtually from East Lansing, Michigan, Ingham County.
Chuck Grigsby.
Present, East Lansing, Ingham County, Michigan.
Cedric Harrow.
Cedric Harrow attending virtually from Mason, Michigan, Ingham County.
Helen Josephson.
Helen Josephson attending virtually from Clarkston, Michigan, Oakland County.
Sharon Reed Davis. Chris Root.
Chris Root attending virtually from East Lansing and Ingham County.
Quentin Tyler.
Quentin Tyler attending virtually from Lexington, Kentucky.
Eric Williams.
This is Eric Williams in East Lansing, Ingham County.
And Ron Bacon.
Ron Bacon present, attending virtually, East Lansing, Michigan, Clinton County.
Thanks.
Thank you, Diane, and thank you all for, again, joining us this evening, and welcome to everyone else that's watching in. We'll move on to item 1.2, approval of the agenda, and this is for April 26, 2021. If there's no amendments or changes, I'll look for a motion to approve.
Motion.
Moved by Commissioner Josephson. Is there a second?
Second, Quentin Tyler.
Seconded by Commissioner Tyler. Is there any discussion on the agenda? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, it's so moved. And then we'll go to item 1.3, approval of the minutes for April 21st, 2021. Is there any edits or changes to those minutes? If not, I'll look for a motion to approve those as well. Moved by Vice Chair Root and seconded by Commissioner Boyle, I believe. Is there any discussion on the April 21st minutes? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we do not have written communication, is that correct? On item 1.4, which is rare. I think it's the first time that we haven't had anything for written communications. We'll move on to item 1.5. Justin, do we have anyone on the line by chance?
We do not have anybody in the queue at this time.
All right, I'll go ahead and move on to item 2, communication item 3, old business, item 3.1. And as you can see there, we will continue our work on the recommendations. In the first line item there, we have suggested changes to recommendations 425, and then the document that's listed there above that. So we can start there. And so thank you for the people who were able to participate and give us this information that we have in here. And we have some different recommendations on the changes there. And as you can see, what we have set up is from Commissioner Boyle and some of the different things she has there. Did you want to speak to that, Commissioner Boyle?
Well, just briefly, they're basically just simple editorial changes and a couple of typos. Pretty clear, and I think it's easy to understand. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Don't see anyone that has any issues with those changes or suggestions there, and so if not, we'll move on to number 2, which has Vice Chair Root listed with her section there as well. So if we can, we'll go ahead and move on to Vice Chair Root.
Chuck, can we just pause for a minute to give an overview by looking at the contents page on the recommendations? Because we've got comments from 3 other people, I think. And the idea that you and I have talked about is going section by section at this point.
Oh, so you want to start with the grounds right there? Is that what you're referring to? Did I miss that?
Right.
Gotcha. Okay.
Justin, could you bring up that page 1 of the recommendations document? I just wanted everybody to see that we have underlined the sections on which somebody made some kind of comment. And so and next to each one, we've put who made a comment. So the idea would be, for example, on section, let's take section 3, because that's a substantive thing. Well, actually, we've just dealt with all of Kathy's, but on section 2, for example, both Cedric and I have a comment. So rather than going through all of mine and then going through all of Cedric's, the idea is to go in order of the recommendations, in order of the sections of the recommendations. So we have this to refer to, and then the suggested changes document is organized by person, so that you can see the integrity of each person's responses. But we're going to try to go through it by section. Does that make sense to folks? Okay.
All right. Thank you, Vice Chair. So I think we're good to go with how we're doing. I appreciate you cleaning that up for me.
And I think, Kathy's, it made sense to just say yes to those because they're very simple editing changes. So we can say we've taken care of all of those. That's what I think I heard from the group.
All right, and so we're still in section 1 on grounds, and
right.
You're up basically for that.
Yeah. So I had 2 thoughts. One is that it might be more useful to have this section be an introduction that's narrative text rather than the beginning of the format that we're using for kind of draft sections of an ordinance. It seemed to me that that was kind of more of the way it functioned. And, perhaps Eric has a different feel about that since this was his draft. And then I had a couple of substantive changes as well. But the first issue is whether to make what is now section 1 grounds into an introduction rather than having it be a numbered section with lettered points.
Could I ask a question? If I could, so you mean not to have lettered paragraphs, but just to have it as a narrative introduction in a single paragraph or paragraphs, however it ends up
in paragraphs. Yeah. And then I do have some thoughts about some of the language specifically, but the first is sort of a structure question for the group.
Please go ahead, Commissioner Ellsworth Etchison.
I'm in favor of changing the layout into a more narrative under the grounds section.
Is there anyone that has any issues with maybe doing it and put it into a narrative format and taking it out of the grounds as listed now? So I think we're pretty much in consensus with that, Vice Chair.
Eric, are you okay with that, or do you think it's important for some reason to have it this way?
Am I muted? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you.
I don't think it's important. I just copied this from the COVID resolution that the city council passed a couple months ago. They had a ground section and authority section. And I just copied what the last resolution looked like. But I really don't think it matters to me.
I see.
How it works. Maybe Mr. Lahanas has a template that he uses, but
well, there's a difference between a resolution and an ordinance. So maybe
that's
where that comes in.
It's an ordinance.
Oh, that's an ordinance? Okay.
It's an ordinance.
Okay. Well, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, if you go to city webpage and you look at the ordinances that haven't been yet put into the code,
Right.
they have 2 ordinances there. And one of them is the code, is the COVID ordinance. But I don't see how it makes a difference whether you put this stuff in an introduction or put it in the grounds paragraph. And
Okay.
if that's the way the city likes it,
Mhm.
doesn't make a difference to me.
It's helpful to have that background. Another reason that I thought this might go into a narrative introduction instead was that you'll see that I've also suggested a purpose statement that's just 1 paragraph that I thought might work better as a first paragraph of an ordinance. So it's kind of the idea of a substitution as well, to move 1 to introduction and then use the purpose as the new section 1.
Well, I think it looks fine and reads well as an introduction instead of numbered and lettered paragraphs. So I think either is all right with me, but I prefer the suggested change.
Okay.
See a couple of head nods there, Vice Chair, in regards to supporting that. I haven't seen anyone talk really different.
Well, if it's okay with Eric to switch it to an intro, unless somebody feels strongly that it should stay this way, it sounds like we could make that change. Okay. Cedric had some suggestions about ways of combining it that I think are consistent with putting it in the intro. Cedric, do you want to say a word about your suggestions on grounds?
It was generally the same line of thinking, that this
That's
is
what it
sort
looked
of
like.
introductory material, and then we're better off starting with the ordinance with that purpose section.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks. The 2 sections here that are in yellow are sections that I suggest taking out. The first one says white and Black Americans, for example, are worlds apart on issues related to policing, the criminal justice system, and other aspects of society. And it seems to me that the issue that this ordinance is going to deal with is about policing rather than perceptions of policing. And also my political education is that it is not the case that all people of one race perceive the world one way. So I sort of question starting out with that formulation. And the purpose statement has a statement about the importance of racial equity and policing, which I think is more on point than perceptions.
Is anyone opposed to that? Call it, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think I just want to echo what Chris is saying. I think that as part of like kind of an introductory section, it actually to me comes off a little bit more divisive. And so we're not trying to split people up on that. So I think that it's probably best that that one would get removed. So I agree.
Thank you, Commissioner Caldwell. And I see Commissioner Boyle also is in agreement with that. And I think we feel that we're in consensus with what you're looking at, Vice Chair, is taking that out. Is that being okay unless someone has something to say to counter that? Yes, Commissioner Williams, please go ahead.
I would point out that everything in that ground section is basically, first part of the ground section is plagiarized from Sam Walker's book, Police Accountability. I didn't write it. If you think I was being divisive.
Well, if we have material from Sam Walker's book, it should probably be quoted as such, which here again, one can do in an introduction, although I would still suggest not, including this, but if there are other sections that are from his book, I think it should appear that way in the intro. That helps explain why this mass incarceration sentence is there, because in section C, that's also in yellow highlighted, mass incarceration has deprived millions of people of the right to vote, makes all kinds of sense in a national document, but I don't think it makes sense in a Michigan document, because once people get out of jail or prison in Michigan, they again have the right to vote. And I wouldn't want to be misleading about that.
Well, now that is something that I have a question about.
Okay.
We've been talking for 6 months about how difficult it is to find a police officer responsible for misconduct. And most of the rules that govern those findings in police departments all over the country come from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, a group of federal officials who are put there by the president and the Senate, who are heavily influenced by the suppression of Black votes in the South, and have been so since the end of the Civil War. So to say that Michigan is not connected with the suppression of Black votes in the South is a little myopic. So I looked askance at that when I saw that in Walker's book, but on further reflection, it makes a lot of sense that we are part of a larger country that has used white supremacy as its constitution.
Perhaps there's a different way of talking about that, because that's certainly true. My concern was that if people saw this in an ordinance adopted in East Lansing, people thought it would be reasonable to think that it applied to people here.
Well, and it also undercuts the credibility of our report if someone looks at that and says, well, that's not true, because in Michigan, your rights to vote are restored. So I understand what Eric is saying, and I think it's a very good point. But it really doesn't, from the standpoint of this being an introduction to our document, I think we're better off if this sentence is removed or revised to at least reflect that it's not true in Michigan anymore.
Right.
Please, Commissioner Ellsworth Edgerton, go ahead.
So this statement, this sentence is about mass incarceration depriving millions of people the right to vote, meaning when you are incarcerated, you cannot vote. And because of a systemic structure undergirding the United States on an attack on Black Americans since Reconstruction, using the prison system, the school to prison system, as a way to remove Black men in particular, for Black citizens, from the streets and incarcerate them, removes them from that right to vote. This isn't talking about once they're out of prison and they have this voting right restored. This is about people who are incarcerated, they do not have the right to vote while they are incarcerated. So I'm not in favor of removing it. And I understand this is an introductory statement. But there are some things about this around policing that's just not, it's not pretty, right? The disparities over policing is not pretty. And so while I do support that we put this in some type of a narrative format, there are some things though that I think that we do still need to, people need to know what's going on, right? And so I'm not in support of removing that statement because people cannot vote when they are incarcerated.
Thank you, Commissioner Ellsworth Edgerton. Did anyone else want to weigh in on section C in regards to removing it or keeping it in there? I feel like we have a couple of great opinions and points about why to keep it in there and why not to have it in there. And I believe this will be something that we may have to vote on if, depending on kind of how our discussion goes and where we're at right now. But I'd love to hear from some other commissioners if they're willing. Commissioner Callwood, please go ahead.
If folks are feeling as though that particular sentence should stay, I think it could. Maybe we could just add like a supportive sentence after that has something to do to tie in like Michigan's kind of stance on things, just to kind of further support, again, why it is like a larger systemic issue, but also then bringing it back to how does it apply to Michigan? So that could be.
Commissioner Ellsworth Edgerton.
So just for clarification, is that a false statement in Michigan? Can you vote when you're incarcerated in Michigan? Okay, so there's not anything false about that statement in Michigan. I think the confusion comes in how the sentence were interpreted by, a couple of the commissioners, in that voting rights are restored after you are out of prison. But that's not what this says. It says mass incarceration has deprived millions of people the right to vote. And so when you're incarcerated, you cannot vote. That's how I read that sentence.
But we didn't read it that way. I think that's a problem with the way the sentence is now. I mean, I guess I don't really have strong feelings about it has to come out. I hate to clear it up with a footnote because this is an introduction. But I think a lot of people would read this, particularly considering what's been in the news, that, once you've been convicted, you lose your right to vote. You don't get it back. Not you lose your right to vote while you're in prison. I can see you could read it that way, but you could read it the other way too. So, but I don't think it's crucial that it be removed.
How about if Kelly and Eric come up with a way to work on this a little bit so that it can't be misunderstood as meaning that people in Michigan continue to not be able to vote after they get out of prison. And we could consider it, at a next meeting. I think it is a question of possible different interpretation of the sentence, because people losing their rights for life after they get out of prison is an issue that's been in the national news a lot since before the last election. So I think we can find a way to handle it that people will all be happy with, so long as there isn't a problem of possible misinterpretation.
Commissioner Williams or Commissioner Ellsworth Edgerton, how do you feel about that suggestion for Vice Chair Root? Or are you at a point where you want to leave it as is, and that's what you wanted to, how you see it and what you think is important about it?
I'm fine with, looking at restructuring it. I would like to see the section within the book of where it's placed, so I understand some context behind what the author was stating, as to whether or not it's just left alone or removed or revised.
Okay. Commissioner Harrell and then Commissioner Boyle, please go ahead.
I'm fairly certain that when Sam wrote that he was thinking of felony disenfranchisement, not that people are ineligible to vote while they are in prison, which is a true statement. I think the bigger concern is that the conviction removes that ability for life, right? So it's, I mean, nobody can vote when they're in prison. That may be a relatively limited period of time. The concern in that context was truly that the arrest resulting in a conviction doesn't just impact you for the 2 years that you're incarcerated, potentially. It impacts you for the rest of your life if you are no longer allowed to vote due to a felony conviction.
I believe what's been said earlier and agree with it is really not important to argue, to wordsmith things in the introduction or the grounds paragraph or anything like that. We have more important things to get to. So I just don't. I think we're wasting too much time, to talk about it. If you all want to take it out, take it out.
Boyle, please go ahead.
My suggestion would be we revise it to read as follows. Mass incarceration has deprived millions of people of the right to vote, not only while incarcerated, but in many states, even after they have completed serving their time.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyle. Commissioner Ellsworth Edgerton, is that something that makes sense to you in regards to where you're at before? We know how Commissioner Williams feels about it, so it comes down to kind of where you're at with that recommendation.
I'm fine with that revised statement.
Yeah, the point that I saw in that statement was not a point about Michigan. It was a point about the United States and who gets to be on the Supreme Court, who gets to be in the Senate. And those people get to be where they are because of the suppression of the Black vote in the South. That's why we have the Garrity decision. That's why we have the 14th Amendment with that loophole about criminalization of ex-slaves. So the value that I saw in that statement was the fact that we are connected to a system that depends on the suppression of the Black vote in the South. That's why Michigan is not alone. And that's why it's not quite appropriate to treat Michigan as if it was its own country. But as I say, it's not important. Go ahead and take the whole thing out.
Well, Kathy has suggested a revision that does not suggest that Michigan is completely unconnected to this whole political situation.
Yeah, I think the recommendation by Commissioner Boyle works. And I think we're there and we can move on because.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Commissioner Williams has already expressed how he feels about it and why we have a recommendation for alternate language. Everyone seems to be in consensus with that. I think we're good to go. We can move on to section F, subsection 1. I see there's highlighted there.
Okay, this is simply one word that I'm suggesting we take out. It says investigations of critical incidents such as use of force and complaints to identify needed changes in policy, supervision, and training. Critical incidents is used in policing to mean things other than complaints and use of force. So I thought we would just take out the word critical so that it wouldn't bring in a term that's usually used in a different way.
So just has it read as follows, investigations of incidents such as use of force, and then just leave it like that with the language?
And
Is that what you're
complaints,
saying?
right?
Gotcha. Anyone have any issue with that? All right, I think we're good to go with that, Vice Chair Root. And that's all you had for that section of grounds, is that correct?
Yep.
All right, and then Commissioner Harrell, did you have anything specific to grounds or the section, or did you already address it?
No, I already addressed it. Thanks.
Okay. All right, we'll move to, based on the contents that Vice Chair Root has helped me out with, to section 2 of authority. And we have some recommendations from Vice Chair Root and Commissioner Harrell. So please go ahead.
My suggestion is that that also be incorporated into the introduction. It's very simple.
Does anyone have any issues with that suggestion? Or change, I should say? All right, that's all you had. So Commissioner Harrell?
My only concern was whether there are other places within the ordinance that refer to other section, excuse me, other sections of the city charter than just section 4.11. And if there are, if those should be included in this initial statement.
Commissioner Boyle, please go ahead.
Is that something, perhaps we're going to have the city attorney review this? Is that perhaps something that the city attorney could identify if it's necessary?
You're asking me, I would say yes. I would say yes, but you know, I'm not paid the big bucks, so I'm not quite sure. I think so.
I think it's reasonable. I just spoke to the city attorney and they'll be waiting for the document. So we can put a question on that. Perhaps you want to put a note and say, is there anything else to add to this? To draw their attention to things that we specifically want them to look at.
Okay. Thank you, City Manager Lahanas. All right. Is that it for you, Commissioner Harrell, in that section? Thank you. All right. We'll go to section 3 definitions. And we have Commissioner Boyle first up with her recommendations.
That was just one of the edits that we already agreed to.
Oh, okay.
There are 2 things to add that I've suggested before section 3 that are in green on the screen share here.
Oh, I see. Please go ahead.
The first one is simply to identify where the language in this ordinance would fit into the code. Add that it would become Division 12 of Article 5, which Article 5 is where all the commissions are authorized, and Division 12 is a reserved section where we could add this new commission. So it's, you know, this would end up in the ordinance eventually. I thought we could just provide it now, just where it fits. I don't think it's a controversial point.
I don't see anyone having controversy with it, so I think you're good.
Okay. And then the second green point was this addition of the 1 paragraph purpose language that I wonder if people have a thought about whether it helps the ordinance to have that. Maybe you could, Justin, maybe you could switch back to the suggested changes document where, yeah, keep going. Yeah, okay, it's you got it. Right under the word commission, it says to add purpose. And it reads as follows. The purpose of this commission is to increase accountability of the East Lansing Police Department and to strengthen conditions leading to trust in the police department by the community that it is pledged to serve. Because the City Council is committed to the goal of racial equity, the commission will give priority to addressing racial inequities as well as use of force in policing. The commission will enable members of the community to participate in reviewing and making recommendations about police department policies, practices, and procedures, and it will provide means for prompt, impartial, and fair review of complaints brought by individuals against police officers or the police department.
Does anyone have any issues having that inserted there where she has highlighted that in the language? I think we're good to go, Vice Chair Root, as far as that's concerned as well.
Okay.
All right, so are we now to section 3 definitions? I got
Yeah.
ahead of myself there for a second. Okay. So we are there, section 3 definitions. It looks like Commissioner Boyle, you are up with what you have.
Hers was just this red text that we've already dealt with, just an editing issue. Changing and to as well as there.
Gotcha. All right, so then you're up.
So in section A, I don't remember that we've really ever talked about the name of the commission in our previous meetings. My suggestion is, rather than calling it Police Oversight Commission, we call it Independent Community Police Oversight Commission, because independent and community are really important characteristics. And I note that this is the name that's used in Ann Arbor. It's not something I feel, is critically important. It just is sort of a way to communicate and keep in mind what the commission is about.
I personally don't have any issues. I think it's a great suggestion, recommendation. Does anyone differ from that? All right.
You sure? Is there anybody who want to speak to it?
I think we're good to go.
Okay.
I think we're good to go on that. All right. Is that all you have for section 3, Vice Chair Root?
I believe so.
All right. And I apologize. This is quite a bit of information, and that I'm trying to organize and make sure it's flowing well. So please bear with me if I do have some hiccups on some of these sections here. All right, so we'll move to section 4, commission members section. And it looks like Vice Chair Root, you got some things in there to look at.
Mm-hmm. We started with a range here of something like from 7 to 13. And earlier we talked about, well, it should be, a little bit in the higher range. So this time Eric put in at least 9 members, which I agree with. But I think it might be helpful to just give a number. And I'm suggesting the number 11, which happens to be the number we've got now on the study committee, which I think is not unwieldingly large. And given the enormous numbers of responsibilities that are being given, that would be given to this commission under this draft, I think there's more than enough to keep 11 people busy.
Any reactions to that change, to have it just simply say 11 as opposed to at least 9? Commissioner Boyle's in support. Anyone else have anything else to add to that? If not, we will make that change to 11 members, Vice Chair Root, with your recommendation. It looks like there's no counters to it.
Okay. Justin, could you go back to the suggested changes document? To the page 4? Okay, I asked Justin to do this because I've got in bold here 3 paragraphs of a suggestion that would be a suggested revision for the 1 paragraph that's ahead of it. We've talked a little bit about this composition of the commission issue, at a previous meeting, and a couple of people, including myself and Councilmember Bacon, said we should probably keep working on this some more. And so Eric did do some more work and suggested that one way to think about how to ensure diversity that would be relevant is to have people on the commission from different parts of the city, which I interpreted to mean geographic areas. And I'm aware that we haven't done any analysis of where there is particularly heavy police activity, and nor, I also happen to be aware that the Human Rights Commission asked for information a month or two ago about where people reside in the city, if we had any information by racial or ethnic groups, and we don't have that information either. So it seems to me that that isn't the best way to get us where we need to go, and that it would be better to be a little bit more explicit about the people the diversity of people we need, rather than to say, well, we'll just do it by getting people from different parts of the city. So that's why I am suggesting an alternative. Should I read this, or how should we proceed?
I was just going to make a suggestion, Vice Chair Root, that if you don't mind, can you please read it?
Sure.
Just for the people who are listening in who may not be able to see it very clearly.
The City Council shall appoint people to the commission who reflect the city's diverse population, and particularly segments of the community that are protected by the Civil Rights Ordinance. These include diverse people based on race, ethnicity, national origin, income level, age, student status, gender, disability, sexual orientation, and gender identity or expression. People who are vulnerable and have been marginalized and who tend to have significant negative interactions with the police should be amply represented. Having an arrest or conviction record is not a disqualification for membership on the commission. Up to 2 members of the commission who contribute to the desired composition of the commission as described above may be persons who are not residents of East Lansing. So in the first paragraph, it references the Civil Rights Ordinance, which George Lahanas had suggested at our prior discussion. The second paragraph came up from Madison, Wisconsin's ordinance, and Eric included a version of that in his last sentence. The Madison version talks about people with arrest or conviction record, which I thought was a little bit better language than criminal history. I mean, some people are arrested and never get any criminal history. And criminal history also sounds sort of frightening to some people. Arrest or conviction sounds more concrete, I think. And then the third paragraph is a new idea, which I think was reflected in the way we did outreach for the March 29th community meeting, that we really recognized that we had learned from Chief Johnson that 2/3 of the stops by police at the end of 2020 were people who are not residents of East Lansing. And we've talked a lot about people driving through East Lansing or avoiding driving through East Lansing or being concerned when they're in the city. So we know that the police of our city have an effect on people who are not residents. So it seemed to me, and there is some record of the Seniors Commission in East Lansing allows up to 2 non-residents. So it seemed to me there's no need for us to say there must be 2 of the 11 people as non-residents, but it seemed that we should open that possibility. those are my suggestions.
Thank you, Vice Chair Rue. Based on what you've seen and heard for that revised section for, it looks like for section F, does anyone have any issues with this revision that's been presented by Vice Chair? I see that Commissioner Boyle is in support of that. I don't see anyone who is talking against it, Vice Chair, and it looks like those revisions will make the cut.
Does anybody want to speak with a reservation about any of them? Okay.
So that concludes that section there, and it looks like we pick up on all the way down to sections of, it looks like section 8, education of commission members. Is that correct?
I don't think there's anybody raised any issue there.
Okay. So
Am I wrong about that? Cedric, do you
we
have
have
one?
comment. We have a comment item 10 that is highlighted there
Ah,
for that section there. You see that where it's
Cedric asked if that was in the wrong place. Because item 10A is not on that page.
Oh, I see.
Eric, should that be moved down to item 10A? I think this was a question to you, Eric, about whether it belongs.
I was muted. I was muted. What are you talking about moving?
The highlighted line, the line at the beginning of which is highlighted, it seems to refer to section 10A, but 10A is not on this page. This line is located before section 9. So Cedric was wondering whether this actually belongs as a comment with section 10A.
Well, let me look.
Or
Maybe
whether
item-
it's supposed to reference item 8A, I guess.
Yeah, I didn't look at the section, so I don't know what it concerns.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Item 10A is based on East Lansing City Code, section 2.65.
Yeah, does item 10 mean section 10, or is there something else there that's going on?
Hold on a minute.
Sure.
East Lansing. I think that is probably the old section 10. And the reference to section 10 there should probably be changed to section 8. Be section 8A. It should read section 8A.
Oh, okay.
Great.
That's a section that requires members of boards to keep up to date on their, their bailiwicks.
All right, well, that clears that up pretty simply then. We can go ahead and move on. Looks like section 10, there's some things highlighted under B, C, and D. Budget.
Yeah, this isn't a big deal. This is the types of activity that would require a budget. And I thought we might just reorder them a bit and change publication production to read publication production website and social media, and change public relations and advocacy to public outreach and recommendations, because outreach isn't included here. And I'm not keen on the government entity having public relations. And if we have publication production, website, and social media elsewhere, I don't think I don't think we need public relations.
It looks like Commissioner Boyle is in support of that. Does anyone else have any comments or reactions to that? If not, we'll leave those revisions as is that Vice Chair has indicated. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to section 11, adjustments for impact on police department. Well, no, there's nothing
The
there.
next underlined one is section 13.
13, commission duties. All right, please go ahead, Commissioner Vice Chair Rule.
We can't hear you, Chuck?
Please go ahead while we catch up with you to get into that section there for section 13,
Okay.
commission duties.
The first item under section 13 is commission duties, or sorry, section 13 on commission duties seems to me to be something that belongs earlier in the document. And my first reaction was to just move it from investigations into the category above called commissions, the commission. But on further reflection, I wondered whether it might be moved up even further so that it would become section 6, so that the order of sections would be purpose, authority, definitions, commission members, independence, and then duties. It's quite common for duties of a commission to come pretty early in a document so that people get a sense of what the commission is going to do. And that would put it before staff, panel of investigators, education of commission members, free speech, budget, adjustment for impact of police department, and evaluations. I think those other things kind of have more meaning if you've already understood what the commission duties are. So it's just a placement question. I think having the duties in the first section of the ordinance will help people understand what this is all about.
Do any commissioners have a reason not to move it? And move it up to where I think she said is right up there by section 6. If I heard you correctly.
Put it before section 6.
Or section 6.
Yeah, so it would become the new section 6.
Understood. Any counters to that at all? It looks like everyone is in support of that, Vice Chair Root, in regards to your recommendation to moving that up to ASB section 6.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In what is now section 13, the same one we're talking about, commission duties, there was another thing I was suggesting be moved within section 13, which is that item I is about public participation, interacting with people in the public. And that seemed to me to fit better coming after B and C, because those are also about engaging with the public. And then also it seemed to me that it would be helpful. Eric starts that by saying, as part of its mission to advocate reforms to the criminal justice system, the commission and members of the commission may participate in events, organize events, engage in public education, and listen to people in the Lansing metro area. I suggest keeping all that, but also adding at the beginning of it, the commission will hold at least one meeting annually designed to receive input from the public. There are a lot of ordinances in other cities that include a statement like that. It's a kind of a statement, I think, of accountability for the commission, that it will every year make sure that it's doing at least one well-publicized meeting where it invites public participation. And they could be doing all these other things that are in the this same paragraph as well. but that there would be one place where it would be clear to folk that they were invited to show up. That I thought we should add.
Commissioner Boyle is in support of those changes and recommendation that you put forth, Vice Chair Root. Does anyone have any reactions or comments other than support? And moving that forward, looks like Commissioner Haro is in the same with alignment with what you have there, Vice Chair Root.
We can't hear you, Chuck.
We can't hear.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Am I good? I'm sorry. So it looks like Commissioner Haro, Commissioner Boyle are in support of what you have there in the changes, Vice Chair. And I was just asking the commission if there was anyone else who was opposed to any of those changes or recommendations put forth. All right. So it is, those recommendations have been accepted, Vice Chair.
Okay. Justin, could you take us to the suggested changes document, top of page 6? Thanks. This is a suggested additional point in the commission duties, which is about a website. The website is mentioned in a couple of places. It's referenced, but there's no statement that says there's going to be a website. So I thought it might be good to just have a spot where that's stated. It may be that this is more detailed than folks think is wise, but I thought it might be helpful to at least consider this. The way the suggested new section of commission duties reads is the commission shall maintain a website where information such as reports and recommendations are posted and remain accessible. The commission shall also maintain social media accounts that can be used to inform the public of its activities, such as upcoming meetings, reports, and recommendations. A web page for the commission shall be part of the city's website with basic information and a link to the website of the commission. In other words, this commission would have a page on the city official website that would look like the other commission web pages, and it would have a website where a lot of additional information will be posted that is, of a different nature than other commissions' websites, web pages. And we've talked about this a little bit. I remember Kathy Boyle saying she heard a number of people at the March 29th meeting talk about the importance of a website and of it being independent, and that if that helps people in the community have a sense that this is an independent group, that might have value. So that's where this comes from.
As you were talking, Vice Chair Root, I saw Commissioner Boyle and Commissioner Ellsworth Edgerton nodding in support of that in the website and making sure that that's put in there. So is there any other commissioners that are seeing that differently than what has been suggested? Commissioner Williams, were you about to speak? Okay, I think we're good to go with that part there. And we can go ahead and move on, Vice Chair.
Justin, if you could just scoot down so we can see the K and the L on this same page. Now that we don't, yeah, that's perfect. Okay, this is also in commission duties. There's 2 points next to each other. One of them is about accreditation and the other is about early intervention system. And I support having sections about both of those topics. On accreditation, the language there now says that the commission would may make recommendations to assure that the department is complying. And there is another agency that determines or provides guidance about what constitutes compliance, which is part of the procedure that the ELPD is involved in now. So I thought it would be good not to be confusing about the role of the commission. So I suggested something a little bit different, just saying the commission can make recommendations regarding how the community can best benefit from how accreditation standards are implemented. Because the standards of the Michigan Law Enforcement Accreditation Commission don't say exactly how things should be done. They are minimum standards. So the commission might be able to make suggestions about how those are carried out. And I thought that what the commission could bring would be, you know, an outside voice about how it could benefit people from the community. So that's what I'm suggesting there.
Any reactions to those? It looks like Commissioner Boyle has given me the thumbs up. And I believe I saw Commissioner Ellsworth Edson do a head nod in support as well, if I'm not mistaken. Any counters to the recommendation that's Vice Chair Rue has indicated for K?
I should probably mention in both of these, K and L, I'm suggesting that we take out the words at the end about to make sure that they're fully funded. The accreditation and the early intervention system. It seems to me that's really the council's job, and that it's the, you know, the police department's job to, you know, at budget time to put in a request for what they need. And I kind of question the commission getting involved in advocating for budget of the police department. I thought I should acknowledge that that's part of the change.
One has any issues with those changes and the reasons why you have that set forth.
Okay, and then the section L about the early intervention system, where the language now says to assure that it is effective. I thought maybe a little bit lower standard, that it could make recommendations regarding maximizing the effectiveness of that system. I think that the commission could do that. I'm not sure the commission can really assure effectiveness.
For some reason, I get kind of lost in that, Vice Chair. I apologize. So you're, can you?
It's suggesting changing from, on the early intervention system, that the recommendations, changing it from to assure that it is effective and fully funded, and instead say, make recommendations regarding maximizing the effectiveness of that system.
Any reactions to L and that revision of that section there? Commissioner Boyle is in support of that, and I don't see anyone countering that, Vice Chair Root as well for section L. So I think we're good to go with that recommendation as well.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Now we're into section 15, 16, 17, 18. I've got a suggestion regarding 15, and then Cedric has suggestions about the ones that follow. My suggestion about use of force is the current language says that the commission will be given a report on use of force incidents every 6 months. The council is now being given reports of use of force incidents almost weekly. I think every 6 months is not often enough. So I'm suggesting for use of force in particular, section 15, that we ask for a report every month. I am not suggesting that frequency for the other reports in 16 and 17. I just think there's a lot of concern about use of force, and that the commission might want to really be particularly alert and in a timely way to those issues.
I just would make a comment that I would definitely agree with that. They're meeting at least once a month. It's a great way to have that always available to them
That's
and
right.
mindful of that.
It means really at every meeting, there'd be a new report about use of force. That's a good observation.
Any other reactions or any counters, or anyone have any issues with that, changing that language there? Frequency of that use of force report example.
Okay, so we're over to Cedric for 16 and 17 and 18, and a suggested addition after 17.
So in general, my biggest concern is that we don't want to limit the collection of demographic information, right? If we're focusing only on arrests or only on use of force, I think we're missing a lot of potentially impactful police behavior. And so when we're talking about collecting, demographic data about the officers involved in the incident and about the other people involved in the incident, I think that should be more inclusive than just situations where an arrest is made. Police officers engage in a lot of behavior where ultimately there is no arrest made. Whether that's handcuffing somebody and putting them in the back of the squad while you interrogate witnesses and then ultimately let that person go, or whatever it is. In some of these particular populations, that might mean interacting with somebody who's homeless and telling them to move along, or you're going to cite them for vagrancy and things like that, right? So I just don't think we want to limit that collection of demographic information.
Commissioner Boyle, please go ahead.
I'm just wondering what verb or verbs you're thinking of. If we take transport or arrest, or we leave that and add another one, I'm just wondering how you're going to describe what we want data on.
I'm not positive these highlights are the only part you're talking about there, but that was at least a hint.
Yeah, so I think more broadly, we want to get at, police behavior involving potential suspects, or police behavior involving potentially criminal police interactions with individuals potentially suspected of criminal behavior. Again, we don't expect these sorts of things to happen when police officers are responding to a question for directions, for example, from somebody, or when they're engaging in, traffic enforcement around the scene of a traffic accident or things of that nature, right? I'm not sure, honestly, if potentially criminal is broad enough. That might mean, we might expand it to officer interactions with citizens who are suspected of violating city ordinances or state laws, things of that nature. I think partially some of this is going to depend on, we'll have to go back maybe and look through those data collection instruments for ELPD. I don't remember if demographic information is collected to any extent on those types of encounters. And this relates to my comment about including a section for encounters with juveniles, right? What we're looking at is essentially certain populations that have specific constitutional rights on the basis of those demographic characteristics, right? And then a group of vulnerable people who do not necessarily have those same constitutional protections just on the basis of that vulnerability, right? So that when we're talking about people who are homeless, people who are mentally ill, juveniles, right, there aren't specific constitutional protections that get extended to somebody on the basis of being homeless. It is extended to them on the basis of those other demographic characteristics. All right, so I think when we're focusing on these particularly vulnerable groups, we still need to make sure that we're collecting that demographic information as much as possible.
Vice Chair Root, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if you might be able to draft some language after the meeting that we could look at next time.
I can give it a go. I mean, I
kind of hard to, as a group, figure it out.
So I mean, I can give you a specific example. For instance, in some jurisdictions, officers engage in what is euphemistically referred to as police-initiated trans-jurisdictional transportation, which is essentially, you're a problem. I don't want to arrest you. I'm going to move the problem somewhere else.
Yeah.
That happens fairly frequently with homeless people, as a matter of fact, right? If you're not in my jurisdiction, you're not in my problem. This language, as currently stated, would not collect demographic data about that type of encounter. And I think that's probably something that is fairly important, right? You can think of encounters with juveniles where, officers are out on random patrol and they see a group of kids hanging out in the park, and they go and threaten those kids with a curfew violation or trespassing because the park is closed or things like that. There's nothing that actually occurs there in terms of some official record, right? Then again, we wouldn't be collecting demographic data on those encounters.
Commissioner Boyle, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, that really helps me understand where you're going or what information you're looking at here. But we do need to come up with language so that both council and eventually the police department know what situations we want reports on. So we really need to know, is it transported, arrested, or detained a person? I mean, how do we capture what you're talking about in a descriptive phrase so that we'll get the information that we want? I mean, we do have transported, so the moving them to another jurisdiction, that is covered, but I understand from your explanation, there are lots of other interactions that you're interested, you think we need information about beyond the arrests and transportation.
I think adding detained would be helpful, right? But then at some point we're sort of arguing about the semantics of what it means to be detained, right? When you're talking to a police officer, anybody is entitled to ask them, am I being detained? And if the answer is no, they're constitutionally entitled to walk away. The question is, how many people really know that and how many people feel comfortable exercising that right? I mean, if a police officer stops me and says, hey, let me ask you some questions, and I don't know enough to ask them, am I being detained, right? Police officer can say, well, I wasn't detaining those individuals. They had the right to go, right? And so if we just add the word detained, that doesn't capture that either.
Go ahead, Commissioner Boyle.
Well, we need a word that describes it. I mean, or 2 words or 3 words that describe it, because we want to make sure we get the information that you think is important. And in order to do that, we've got to describe it to council and the police department. So as far as drafting language, it really isn't necessarily going to solve our problem to have you describe situations that you're trying to capture, if we can't come up with actual verbs that describe what we're trying to capture?
I think we can add detained as well as pedestrian or traffic stops. That would help to capture those instances in which, even though somebody may be constitutionally entitled to leave, they don't feel that way.
Did you want to jump in, Commissioner Ellsworth Etchison? I saw that you were waiting to speak.
Well, I was going to go back to Commissioner Root's suggestion, which was if Commissioner Hero wanted to take some time to think about it and draft something up and bring it back for next time, as opposed to trying to like do it on the fly here.
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you, commissioners, and thank you, Commissioner Rowe, for taking the moment to recollect that and figure it out so we can have something we can put forth for language that will be helpful for everyone else who's not here to be able to wrap their heads around how we want to get that information. So I appreciate you. Did you have more on this section at all by chance?
No, not those. So 16 and 17, I think those are both the same concern. And then the additional suggestion was to add as section 18 encounters with juveniles, right? Just as another one of those vulnerable populations. Most departments have specific written policies about encounters with homeless, encounters with mentally ill, and encounters with juveniles. So those are sort of those three marginalized groups outside of that constitutionally protected categories. And the language would be substantially similar to section 16 and 17.
I personally absolutely agree with that. Does anyone else have any challenges or counters to that? All right, I think we're good to go with that recommendation. And so we'll move on to, looks like section 18. And we're still on you, Commissioner Hero, with, I believe, what you have for recommendations. Okay, so you're continuing on with some of that. So did you want to speak to that a little bit, please?
Yeah, so that, I mean, section 18, which would now be a new number. In terms of those particular reports we are producing would just be changed to match whatever the language is that we come up with. You know, transports, arrests, and the rest.
Is anyone opposed to making sure that we follow suit with that recommendation and adding that in there as well? I think we're good to go. Commissioner Hero on that, and that recommendation will be input in there. So thank you. And I believe we'll go ahead and move on then from this section, and we'll go down to, looks like all the way through to section 25, if I'm not mistaken, which is titled City Council Resolution Resolving Information Conflicts. And it looks like Commissioner Hero has something to bring to the table on that section.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a little clarity about what Commissioner Williams had in mind here regarding FOIA. As I commented, it's possible in which the commission would ask for something, and the department would say, we're not going to turn over that information. And so I was just wondering if Commissioner Williams assumed that we would not need FOIA, or the oversight body would not need FOIA in that situation, because that would be mediated by City Council.
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, I'm fine with that. I just wanted to make sure where we were at.
All right, so
And
can we,
if you go back to that authority section that quotes the powers of the city council, the city council has the power to ask questions and get answers from anybody in the city government. So that's the power that would be the mantle that would be given to the commission. So
Okay,
just
thank
like
you.
the city council doesn't use FOIA to get information out of the, the police department, the commission wouldn't need FOIA to do that either.
yes, Commissioner Ellsworth Etchison, please go ahead.
And that was, if I recall right, from the community input session, that was something that also came up during that, where the community did not want the commission to have to, the oversight body to have to use FOIA as a way to get information.
Yeah, and I believe I've heard some community input on that as well. And, just speaking off the cuff, I know that process, though, is not perfect. And just because the council member or members have the ability to ask for that information, it doesn't always seem as smooth as you would think it should work. So I would just say that as disclaimer and just be mindful of that, because the information sometimes is sensitive, and sometimes people are not as comfortable as we think they would be when it comes to us being able to have, or this commission to have that information. I just really want to make sure that that is something that is expected through that process, without having to FOIA, without having to fight for that information in a way that they're able to do diligence with the work. So I'll just leave it at that. Commissioner Harrell, please go ahead.
Right, so I mean, that was part of my concern, but I'm assuming this would not preclude the oversight body from using FOIA if, for whatever reason, city council was reluctant to compel production from the police department.
Is that how you see it, Commissioner Williams, that it does not exclude that process within, I mean, I think it's really unusual for a body to have to look at that process in a way. But, is that how you're seeing it? As far as kind of how you wrote it, where it does not exclude that process?
Are you talking about a situation where the police department refuses to give some information to the commission? The commission goes to the city council and says, make the police department give us this information. And the city council says, no, we're not going to make you give that information. You can't have it. You're thinking about that the commission would go to court to force the city council to give up the information?
Yeah, correct.
I kind of doubt that that's possible, since the commission, even though we might call it independent, is not independent in that sense. I don't see how the commission could sue the city.
Vice Chair Root, please go ahead.
I thought what Cedric was asking was whether at that point the commission might use FOIA.
Yes.
Yeah, misunderstood.
No, that was my.
Not going to court, but using FOIA.
Right.
Commissioner Boyle, please jump in.
Well, I agree with Commissioner Williams on this. I think if the commission appeals to city council and city council says, no, we will not provide you with that information, I don't think the commission is in any position to file a FOIA request with either the city or the Department of Police, because we've already gotten a no. And are we then going to try and sue the city? I don't think we can do that. I agree. I think this is set up so that the city will provide us with the information that we are requesting. If there is a dispute and council rules against us, or the commission, so be it. I think that's going to be the end of the line in getting the information.
Commissioner Ellsworth-Edgerton, please go ahead.
Yeah, so maybe if that is the process, that concerns me as a citizen, then, and the purpose of this oversight body and how it might be able to help its citizens. That if we're told, or the commission is told no by council, and that's the end of it, then how is this body positioned to help the community?
Well, you know, a community member could file the FOIA if they wanted the information. The question is,
But isn't that what this body will be made up of community members?
Right, but we're talking about the commission acting as the commission. I mean, if you sort of think this through and you think, well, there's now a dispute. The Department of Police has refused to give us the information. We've appealed to City Council. They've refused to give us the information. So then the commission files a Freedom of Information Act request. That's denied. Who's going to sue the city? The commission going to go out and hire an attorney to sue the city? How are they going to pay for that? We really can't expect the city to pay for an outside attorney to sue itself over a FOIA dispute. I mean, I think we have to have some faith that we're going to get the information that we want, and that if we proceed all the way to council when there's a dispute, we've done everything we reasonably can to get the information. But I just don't see a city commission, independent or not, filing a FOIA, having it denied, and then going to court to enforce, to try and get the information.
That may be the process. Doesn't mean I have to like it.
And I understand that, but I really think we're going to get the information we want. I think if something's refused, then the refusal is going to be important enough that it wouldn't do any good to file the FOIA.
Thank you, commissioners. Commissioner Rowe, please jump in there.
I mean, I have the same concerns that Commissioner Ellsworth-Edgerton does, right? If the oversight body has been denied and there's no point in filing a FOIA because it's just going to be refused again, then there's no point in a community member who's not a part of the oversight body filing a FOIA because it will be refused. And so at that point, it's just a completely closed community.
No, I disagree with that.
And me too.
I disagree with that. You can always, ask Chris Root at East Lansing Info, or you could always go to the ACLU and have them, your friends on the outside, sue the city to get the information. The commission itself can't file a lawsuit, but any citizen can.
Why couldn't the commission go to the ACLU and ask them to take the case pro bono?
I think what would happen is that the city would counter to say that the commission has no standing or authority to bring the suit. But the ACLU could sue in the name of any member of the commission.
As a private individual.
Right.
Right, I agree.
So it's possible you go to the media or you go to an advocacy organization, and they can access the court system, and maybe you'll get more out of the court system than you will out of the city council. That's possible.
Commissioner Rowe, I think that's what Commissioner Ellsworth-Edgerton had said earlier. That's the process. Doesn't mean that you have to like it. So I think that's where we're at with that. Are you okay about moving on from your point on that by chance?
I would make the additional point that that shows that the commission is not independent. And that it's an Orwellian name to call this an independent commission. But that's water over the dam.
All right. Any more discussion before we move on? Okay. So looks like we're going to jump down quite a bit to section 33, and we have mediation of disciplinary complaints. And it looks like Commissioner Williams had something that he got from a community member that maybe he wanted to talk about real quick.
Was that circulated as part of the root document? Do you have that?
I don't.
At the end it's at the end of the recommendations.
It's there? Okay.
Yeah, you're talking about Nell Kunmich's email?
Right.
Yeah, it's the last page of the recommendations document.
Okay.
At least it is
Yeah,
online.
So she says she has some questions about sections 33 and 34.
Justin, this is the recommendations revision. If you could bring up the suggested revisions.
And those are
page 9. Perfect.
Those
There you go.
Those concern the let me look at these again.
It concerns the mediation. I can read it.
Let me look at them again, just meant to see if I understand it.
Okay.
If I can explain it. So she's talking about where does the commission get the authority to send a complaint to mediation. And then she's saying that, you know, she doesn't understand the flow of the ordinance. And she wonders how the commission can insert itself and make a recommendation before the police chief takes final action on a complaint or on an investigation. So there are two questions about what is the legal authority for our complaint process. And if you recall in the draft, if there's a complaint between an individual citizen that concerns an individual police officer, that can be sent to mediation, and the commission can pause the complaint process while the two parties mediate. Now, it seems to me that if the city council writes an ordinance that provides for a pause in the complaint adjudication process, that would be within the power of the city council to do that.
Agree with that.
With respect to the commission asserting itself or inserting itself between the staff investigation and the police chief's final decision, she's asking, doesn't this conflict with the union contract? Now, and of course, we're going to send this draft to the city attorney and to the city's labor lawyer. But as I read the police department's policy on complaint processing, first, the accusation comes in to the police department from whatever source. The police department assigns it to an investigator, typically the supervisor of the police officer and concerned. The investigator conducts an investigation, concludes the investigation with a recommendation, exonerated, sustained, and so forth. And the next step is that it goes to the police chief, who takes disciplinary action. What this draft is doing is saying between the point that the investigation report comes out and the point where the police chief makes a decision about disciplinary action, whether to take it or not, the commission will come in, review the investigation report, do whatever investigation it wants, make a recommendation to the police chief, and all that will happen before the police chief makes his final decision about discipline. Now, as I understand the union contract, that describes a grievance procedure. And the grievance procedure kicks in when the police chief decides to take disciplinary action against a police officer. There's steps that go through the arbitration procedure. So that the grievance process doesn't start until the police chief makes his disciplinary action known, makes a decision about disciplinary action. So what happens under this draft is that the commission will do its thing and make its recommendations before the police chief acts and before the grievance procedure under the contract is triggered. That way we would not be interfering in the disciplinary process or the grievance process that's set up by the contract. So that's my explanation of what happens, or what we think is the authority for the mediation procedure and the way in which our role in the disciplinary process does not conflict with the collective bargaining agreements. Maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. Maybe the labor lawyer and the city attorney will have a different view of that. But I think that's the explanation that responds to Ms. Kumich's comment. I sent her that response, and her suggestion was we should put that in a comment in the draft.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Did you want to weigh in, Commissioner Boyle?
Yes, I did. Thank you. First of all, I point out that it says that the commission may, it's not a requirement, facilitate mediation of a disciplinary complaint. And in order to have mediation, both sides have to agree to the mediation, both the police department and the individual who's filed the complaint. So it can only be done, mediation can only be done by agreement. I do not think there's any intention here to make the mediation binding. If they don't reach an agreement that's acceptable to everybody, then the mediation is not going to resolve the dispute. But last but not least, I remember what Councilmember Bacon said to us earlier on about some of the issues we were wrestling with. And that was that if we think it's a good idea, we should send it along to council, even though we may have some questions about exactly how it's going to work and whether there's going to be funding for it, et cetera. So I think, particularly in light of the explanation that committee member Williams has given us, and the fact that lots of times if something can be mediated, you can resolve a dispute quickly and people are satisfied. I think we should leave the language in as it is and send it on to council.
Any other comments or input based on the information that we got from the community member, Mrs. Kumanich? And then having us resolve that by sending it to our city attorneys in regards to understanding how we can get through that. All right, I think that's what we'll do then. We'll wait to kind of see what they have to say, unless you had something different from that, Commissioner Williams. I think that's the approach that we'll take to that input. Okay, he's shaking his head yes, in agreement with that process. All right, thank you for that. So we'll move on to what section are we on now?
We're on section 34. Which is the same screen. It's the second comment from Nell Kunmunch about police department investigation findings. It's another question.
We just talked about that.
Okay, so we're going to, our response to both sections 33 and 34 is that we're going to leave this in and see what response we get?
I believe so. That's what we're going to do. Exactly.
Fine.
Just
I wasn't sure whether it was referencing both of them. That's fine. Okay, then the next thing is section 35, which is my posing a question. I don't have an alternative suggestion on this point, but I was just wanting a little more understanding in 35 about the commission shall make the investigation record it receives available to the public on request, subject to any promises to protect confidential information. There's something I'm missing about how an investigation record would be made available to the public and why it would be on request, and why would somebody in the public make a request rather than the commission deciding what should be released. I was just wondering if you could help me understand.
Is that a question for me?
Yep.
I wouldn't put an investigation report up on a website. I wouldn't publish it. If somebody wants to see it, then they would have a right to ask for it, and the commission would have an obligation to provide it, unless there was something confidential in it. But you wouldn't publish it. Make it available on request.
Well, if somebody requests it and receives it, then they can do anything they want with it.
Yes, you could publish it if you want to.
Okay. Where it says subject to any promises to protect confidential information, is that promises by commission members, or that the commission would elicit a promise from the person making the request?
A promise to protect confidential information would be done by the commission.
So if once it's given to somebody in the public wouldn't have any promise. Wouldn't have made a promise.
The commission wouldn't divulge confidential information that it promised to keep confidential. So the public wouldn't see that.
That's what I thought you meant. I'm not positive that it's clear. Well, maybe it is.
You could always file an FOIA request and see if you could penetrate that promise to protect confidential information. But that's another story.
are you, can you say a little bit about what you're anticipating here? What you're wanting to provide for? For example, if a member of the public files a complaint, are you thinking that person might want to request the investigative record without confidential information and they would get it from the commission? Or what kind of situation are you thinking about here?
You know, there are two sections earlier on, section 21 and 22, that discuss confidentiality, confidential information. And in those sections, we talk about those promises to protect confidential information. So if the commission is allowed to see something that the police department says is confidential, protected by statute from disclosure to the public, the commission can look at it, summarize it, produce a summary that doesn't include the secret information, and release that to the public. And that's what the public would see if somebody from the public made a request for the investigation file.
Okay. Thanks.
Are we now complete with section 35? Does that kind of clear everything up for you that you had questions about, Vice Chair?
I had one other suggestion in that section on a different subject, where I'm suggesting a new point C that would say, the commission will give any person, including the complainant and any police officer involved in the incident who has information bearing on the incident, an opportunity to provide that information in person in a meeting with the commission or its members. This is something that is in the Ann Arbor ordinance. And it's saying that if somebody makes a complaint and they do so, knowing that this commission exists and thinking that it's a good thing for the commission to review the complaint, that they would like to have an opportunity to speak before the commission. That's another way that having a commission could allow people in the community to be more engaged. I haven't thought of any problem with it. I don't know if anybody else does, if anybody else sees one.
I don't think we do. I thought there was a quick second there, someone was about to give some input, but I don't see anyone has a problem with it.
Do people think it's a good idea to add?
Not seeing anyone who is disagreeing with adding it, Vice Chair Root, so I would take the silence as confirmation of that.
Okay. We've gone through all the comments that were sent ahead of time. That was section 35. The entire document is section 38. The other comment that we have, or the other input we have, is from Kelly to add an appendix. So that's a big item that we still have ahead of us. But I thought this might be a good point to just ask if people have any other things they'd like to have considered between section 1 and section 38. You didn't absolutely have to write it down before the meeting for it to be considered. If somebody has anything that has come to their mind during this meeting or at any previous time about something they'd like for us to consider about these recommendations.
Please go ahead, Commissioner Ellsworth-Etchison.
The only thing I had that we didn't discuss. I had sent in on the 14th, just adding a little bit extra to the subpoena power that we had in the document of, that would include like internal affairs. I think our language that we had in there, like it didn't include outside bodies. And so I can read what I submitted. I can read what I sent in.
Please do.
I put to expand to include compelled information from witnesses outside the police department. This will include internal affairs. This will also include internal affairs to obtain evidence from police officers they may be investigating. And so I can't recall, I don't have the document up with what the language was in there already. You can see if I can try and.
You know what
find
the
it.
section number is?
No, but let me look and see in the email that I sent in if I even addressed this section number. I don't know that I did, quite frankly. No, I didn't address the section number when I submitted it. Because we send it, when we send the minutes, we send it in this one gigantula document. It would be helpful. We like had things broken up into sections so I could open up different PDFs and keep them open. But the way we send it out, it's very hard to find things.
Kelly, is it section 24, cooperation number B? The commission has the full force and authority of the city council under section 4.9 of the city council charter, of the East Lansing City Charter.
No, it actually, what I read last week, the document that was sent out last week, I think Wednesday, that was sent out for us to review. I think I read it. I read the subpoena power language in that document, but I'm trying to find that document now.
I have done a word search for that, and it's in the recommendations document on page, it's regarding section 35. It's a comment item F. Subpoena is used in that comment 3 times. Oh, it is about section 4.9, as it turns out, of the city charter. That comment quotes section 4.9 of the city charter.
You're in the recommendations document?
Yes, I am.
What page are you on?
Unfortunately, I'm not seeing a page number. If you do, can you do a search?
It's page 32.
Page 32, thank you.
Thank you.
Could you maybe bring that up, Justin? I know you're juggling a lot of documents. Oh, you've got the right document. Yeah, you've got it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm looking at the wrong document.
He's got it up on the screen. This is a direct quotation from the city charter of the power that the council has under section 4.9 of the city charter.
Okay.
And it says the council may make investigations as to municipal affairs, and for that purpose may subpoena witnesses, administer oaths, and compel the production of books, papers, and other evidence. Failure on the part of any officer of the city to obey the subpoena or to produce books, papers, and other evidence pursuant to the subpoena shall constitute misconduct in office. Those are the references to subpoena power.
Yeah, okay, and that is what I read. And I was just looking to have conversation around expanding that to include internal affairs. You know, if we're looking at internal affairs, or some outside agencies, the state police, Michigan State Police, or whatever, that's investigating something, that we might need to subpoena, have the ability to subpoena. And so I was just looking at expanding upon that.
So when you talk about expanding, Commissioner Ellsworth Etchison, so can you help me out? Because I'm a little bit,
So I
not
wrote to include compel information from witnesses outside the police department. This would include internal affairs to obtain evidence from police officers that they may be investigating. And actually, that would have come from the NACOL document.
Well, we can't amend the city charter at this time by this ordinance. We can't do that.
So what would preclude us from, just like I'm with the appendix that we're going to discuss sometime tonight on the qualified immunity, like having something added to the code?
I think a change in the city charter requires a vote by the people.
Okay.
On a ballot.
So does this have to be part of the city charter?
Well, what we're reading that you were saying you'd like to amend is language in the city charter.
Yeah, but could we, I guess what I'm saying is, can we move that away from the city charter itself?
Yeah, I hear what you're suggesting, and I don't know quite how to implement it.
Were you about to jump in there, Commissioner Rowe?
Yeah, so because this stems from the city charter, right? This provides the authority of the council over employees of the city. So that there's no way to say that the city council can subpoena Michigan State police officers who are conducting an investigation without amending the city charter itself and without probably amending state law.
Right.
No,
So there's no way then for us to add additional.
The city can sue sue the state police if it wants to. It's unlikely. And if it files a lawsuit, it can file a subpoena. But
internal affairs is part of the city.
I don't think
That's
East
not
Lansing
an
Police
outside.
Department has an internal affairs division. I don't think.
Well, then you're just talking about the state police.
Yeah.
Does this relate to the section of the resolution of the recommendations about MCOs?
No.
Okay. I don't know.
File it to get a subpoena, you have to have a lawsuit going.
I think, our proposal requires the city to cooperate and comply with our requests. So as long as we're requesting it from another part of the city, then absent the confidential information problem, the city has to provide it.
Want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to weigh in while you're processing the new information from Commissioner Boyle in regards to her last comment. Where are you at, Commissioner Ellsworth, based off the discussion and kind of some of the things that were brought in, your recommendation in trying to get this included in there, and the reality of the charter and the council powers and all that may be limitations to that. Where are you at now with the discussion?
Accepting defeat. I'm just accepting what it is, I guess.
Yeah, and I didn't want to say it for you, but I just think that's something that will, another day, another option, another opportunity, and we'll leave it at that. Did anyone else have any more points to that discussion, or wanted to weigh in? Were you waving your hand, Vice Chair Root?
I wanted to bring up one other issue in the recommendations.
Please.
I know I've brought up a lot before the meeting, but then I had one that came to mind today that I think is straightforward, and it's an issue we've talked about before. It would be an additional subsection in the commission duties that would say, and that section has a lot of things the commission can make recommendations about. So this would say the commission may make recommendations to the city council about issues to be discussed in contract negotiations with police unions. This was something Council Member Bacon expressed an interest in from the study committee a little while ago at one of our earlier meetings, which we didn't have time to address, but it seemed that would be consistent with that, putting that into the duties of the Oversight Commission on an ongoing basis might address that interest.
Do the commissioners disagree with Vice Chair Root's input in having that added in?
We're not hearing you, Chuck.
I'm so sorry. Am I here now? I apologize. Sorry about that. So I was just asking if anyone had any reactions or comments that counter Vice Chair Root's input on including that in per what Councilmember Bacon had talked about in previous meetings. So I don't see any dissent to what your recommendation, Vice Chair Root, and I think we can go ahead and move on if you don't have anything else that has come to light as we were doing our discussion with recommendations. Did anyone else have? I know maybe some of us didn't get a chance to really maybe look at everything. I just as we've been talking here, did anything else come to play before we go to the next phase of this process in regards to their input on these recommendations? And please feel free. We can always go back to something we've already covered just in case we need to and look at it as a whole. But I just want to make sure that we got everyone point of emphasis about what's important to them with their input, with the recommendations. All right, so we are now complete with that. And I think, so if I understand the process, we'll be talking some more about what we have on our agenda, but so we're in unison about what we talked about tonight and forwarding that from here. Just want to make sure everyone understands that's what we're doing in our next phase of what's happening. So as we all understand that, I can go ahead and move on.
Okay, so I think this is the point where we talk about the qualified immunity proposal from Kelly. Because we've gotten through the 38 sections. So this would be essentially an additional appendix to the recommendation, where we've got Appendix 1, Ordinance Establishing Policy on Criminal Charges. This would be parallel to that. So why don't you take it away, Kelly?
Yes, please do.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to. So I'm not sure if you guys had a chance to review the recommendation. As you know, New York City Council recently paved the way where you don't necessarily have to sit and wait for legislation to be, drafted and passed and into law and all of that for qualified immunity. And so, my recommendation, and I put some links in there for some reference for you guys. But my recommendation would be, and I'll read what I wrote on there. Justin, if you want to pull it up, you can. But if not, I'll just go ahead and read it. And I can still read it. So it's recommended that East Lansing City Council adopt an ordinance that adds a chapter to the Code of Ordinances, which establishes a local right to be free from excessive force and unreasonable searches and seizures. It would mirror the Fourth Amendment, and the ordinance would call for it to be interpreted the same way. It allows citizens to bring civil action within 3 years after deprivation of the right, while explicitly providing that qualified immunity or any other substantially equivalent immunity will not shield officers from responsibility. And so I put in some of the references there of where that information was drafted from. And so mostly from New York, from what they did. So if you have any questions, this is a good time for us to open up for discussion. I gave in the document some background on why qualified immunity even came to be, known also as the Ku Klux Klan Act, which was really about doing away with violating civil rights for freed slaves. Then it, became a thing of, well, officers would feel it to be interfering if they were dealing with these civil lawsuits, interfering with their ability to perform their jobs and so forth. And so the modern day application of qualified immunity, as you saw in the document further down, it's not even relevant today of how it's being applied, because it does not get in any way of an officer to continue to do their job, considering that they may still be working and not on removed from duty on some kind of a suspension or what have you. Typically the city are paying for those expenses. So those concerns of why it was originally brought to be are no longer the case. So I've got those links in there if you want to click on those links and read that information for yourself. But that is what I'm recommending. That is something that came up in our community input session. There was actually, I think, in Commissioner Boyle's community input section from the document that we received of all of the breakout sessions. There was, right off the bat, there was conversation in her breakout room around qualified immunity. And so it was that was just all unfolding in New York. And so now we have more information about it. And so here's the place where we can open up for dialogue if you guys have any questions around what I'm recommending.
Please go ahead, Commissioner Boyle.
Thank you. Well, I am not comfortable making this recommendation, and I'm not comfortable attaching it to the committee's report that's going to council, which I think is in pretty good shape right now. I think, we're part of America, and the American way has become, if someone does something you don't like, you sue them. And I see this as, well, if the police officer does something that an individual doesn't like, we want to make it easier for the individual to sue the police officer, and by extension, in this case, the city of East Lansing as the police officer's employer. And when I look at the resolution that created this committee, the resolution cites building trust and nurturing legitimacy on both sides of the police-citizen divide as the foundational principle underlying the nature of relations between law enforcement agencies and the communities they serve. That's a quote in the introduction. And when we look at our tasks, it says the study committee will make recommendations to the city council designed to enhance community relations by recommending policy and procedures, including but not limited to how to create and implement an independent police oversight commission. I agree that's a pretty broad mandate, but I really think something as game-changing, if that's the right word, as eliminating qualified immunity is beyond the scope of this committee. I can't see how it enhances the relations between citizens and the police department to inform the police department that we're making them more vulnerable to lawsuits than they were before. And, you know, with that in mind, I think that's something that council's certainly going to consider. I'm sure they are. I'm sure they're going to take this up. But I think there's an awful lot of thought that needs to go into this, including, I think, a very high likelihood of what are known as the unanticipated consequences of doing something like this. I think you definitely need input from legal counsel before you even consider doing something like this. It could impact, certainly going to impact defense against lawsuits. It can impact the insurability of the city of East Lansing. If you, by ordinance, remove a standard defense to a lawsuit. And if council, I guess, were to decide this, maybe all well and good, but I certainly don't think we know enough about it to make that recommendation to council right now. I don't think it's something that is necessary in order to serve the purpose that we've been charged with. And I guess my other question is, what is the goal of this? Is the goal to make it easier for individuals to sue the city? And if that's true, why would that be a concern to this committee? If the goal is to change the behavior of individual police officers due to a fear of lawsuit or a judgment against them, we have no way of knowing whether it would have that impact. And I think if what we really want to do is change the behaviors that we don't like, the way to do that is through the policies and procedures of the police department. And that's what the commission is organized to address. So I really think it's an interesting issue. I anticipate that council's going to take it on, but I certainly don't feel comfortable in making a recommendation that it be adopted. Oh, and just one other thing before I leave. I did look at the material that you provided about the New York statute, and in looking at the materials, it includes an assessment of the fiscal impact of the law. And it says, impact on revenues. It is anticipated that there would be no impact on revenues because, of course, they're not going to get any money from this. Impact on expenditures. It is anticipated that there could potentially be costs incurred by the law department in defending officers. However, the estimation of fiscal impacts of legislation is based on the presumption of good faith actors. When acting in good faith, the NYPD should not incur additional lawsuits. and therefore result in no new costs to the city. I don't think that's a very realistic appraisal of what happens when you get the plaintiff's bar involved with suing things. So I would not be in support of making this recommendation.
City Manager Lahanas, did you want to chime in? I thought I saw your mute come off for a quick
I'm
second
just
there.
listening. Unless someone has a question for me, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Commissioner Boyle. Yes, Commissioner Williams, please chime in.
Be quiet, dog. The police chief is always put in a position of sitting in judgment on police officers when they're up on charges or a person has filed a complaint against an officer. And this is true in every police department in the country. And the standard of behavior that they use when they're sitting in judgment on a police officer frequently draws from Supreme Court cases. And Supreme Court cases, as we all know, are very deferential to police officers. And this qualified immunity doctrine is part of that system of the police officer is always right, except, when they shoot somebody in the back that's running away or something like that. And so there are a series of Supreme Court cases that usually guide the discretion of the police chief when they make these decisions. Now, a city would have the power to adopt codes of ethics or encourage, police department would have the power to adopt a code of ethics that is stricter than what the Supreme Court allows. And I think that is the intent of Ms. Ellsworth Etchison's move here, is we disapprove of the deferential attitude that the Supreme Court takes towards police officers, and it should be more strict. So I think there's a more direct way of addressing that issue, which would be to write into the policies of the police department, into the ethics code of the police department, standards of behavior that aren't necessarily pegged to what the Supreme Court has given down for our guidance. So it's, aside from what New York has said, aside from qualified immunity, aside from the legislation that's before Congress now, there's probably a way to skin this cat within the jurisdiction that a city would have. But I think that's ultimately the job for this review commission, because the review commission will have the power to make recommendations about standards of behavior. And this is squarely within their jurisdiction. So I think what Kelly Etchison is asking is something that we are permitting to happen under this ordinance.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Please go ahead, Commissioner Boyle, jump in.
Okay, well, qualified immunity just applies to civil lawsuits where you're suing the police department or the city for wrongdoing and you want money damages. That's the only application of qualified immunity. It does not bar disciplining police officers who violate the procedures or policies of the police department. It does not bar prosecuting police officers who commit crimes. So the things that this commission is overseeing in the city of Lansing are not impacted by qualified immunity. You can discipline a police officer if the police officer violates the policies and procedures and behavior requirements that are set out by the Department of State Police, or excuse me, by the Department of Police. You can discipline them for that. Qualified immunity has nothing to do with that. So if the commission, working with the police department and the city, helps form new policies, more effective policies, better procedures, better training, and police officers don't abide by those, then you've got recourse and you don't have to worry about qualified immunity. It's not going to have any impact. And that's where our energies need to go.
Thank you, Commissioner Boyle. Did you want to respond, Commissioner Ellsworth-Edgerton?
Yes, I would. You know, it would be great if we didn't, if it was that simple for Black and brown people. It would be great if discipline would work out exactly how it should. And people wouldn't have to look for other recourse to satisfy their civil rights being infringed upon, over policed, extreme use of force. And the system protects its own, quite frankly. And so is the purpose of it is for me putting, I think the question that you submitted was one of my purposes of submitting this, or what was my goal? Was it just to make it easier to sue the police? What it is doing is really to pave a way for people to, when they are over policed with extreme use of excessive force and the system fails them, because we see that time and time again. We have seen that play out time and time again when people have been killed with their backs turned, people have been killed with their arms up. When the system is failing and there is no other protection. And so I would disagree that this body is not set up in place to help bring about change in over policing. So that's what I would have to say to that. I disagree with you that it's as easy as you have painted it to be, that there's a system in place that's all fair and equitable, because it's not. And quite frankly, if it were, we wouldn't even be as assembled as a body, quite frankly. So that's what I would have to say on that.
Thank you, Commissioner. I see a hand up, and I can't tell if that's for Commissioner Boyle or City Manager Lahanas. Did you raise your hand function, City Manager, or is that for Commissioner Boyle? I'm sorry.
I did not, unless I did it on accident.
Okay, yeah, you do. You have a little bitty hand up right now. Okay, so all right. Thank you, Commissioner. So I want to just so I'm trying to get this kind of understood. Commissioner Ellsworth-Edgerton, when it comes to what Commissioner Williams had said in regards to the policies and procedures and writing in a code of ethics and conduct and going about your input in that direction, was that something that you can consider, or are you still where you're at with wanting your exact recommendations that you have put forth to be added in the appendages based on our discussion that we've had so far?
What I would do is I'll table this for now. And then if I can connect with Commissioner Williams, we can, have some conversation. And but I'm not pulling this off the table completely right now. I will table it. I'd be willing to table it, and we can have some conversation and come back to it.
Thank you. And I really appreciate that, because I know this is important to you, and you put some time into, especially for the issues that you've raised, which are important issues. And I really believe, if willing, you and Commissioner Williams can really come up with something in a way that I think helps start that process in a way that I think you want to see it end, starting with those code of ethics and conducts and policy and procedures, and building from that. And that's just my opinion, but I really think that may be something that's really increases the percentage of success with you being able to get this included into our recommendations and get that turned around in a way that we can hopefully get it included into what we're doing. Is that okay? Okay. Yes, Vice Chair Root.
Just a quick word. I want to say that I felt very positively when Kelly brought this up. And also feel that the way you just expressed it at the end of this conversation is really telling, about the importance of it. And it came up in the community meeting. It is, of course, an issue in the Congress right now as part of the George Floyd police reform bill. It's one of the key issues being debated between the House and the Senate. So, qualified immunity is on the national agenda. And when we started, I think, when the study committee started, I think there wasn't an example of a city dealing with it at a municipal level. So this is a new idea. I agree that it's a very major issue that it would not be appropriate for us to decide on, in 25 minutes in one meeting. So I think it does bear, serious consideration. I really applaud bringing it up for our consideration.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Does anyone have any more discussion in regards to item 3.1, qualified immunity from Commissioner Ellsworth Etchison, or can we move on? All right, thank you so much. That was a very important section, and that's a big chunk of what we wanted to get accomplished. And so we'll move on to item 3.2. And I just want to say, I know some of that discussion in that previous section. I know it's important to all of us, and I know that I was happy to see that we were able to get through that in a way where we're able to put something forward and stay on our timeline with what we want to get accomplished here with the little time that we have left. So I appreciate everyone being able to navigate through that. All right, we'll move on to section 3.2. And it is how do we finalize the report to City Council? And we do have an attachment there, appendices to Police Oversight Report. Just can you please, by chance, pull that up on the screen?
No, I didn't yet. Chuck, while he's doing that, just to finish up the section 3.1 on the agenda, if we could maybe clarify the next step. I think the next step is to incorporate tonight's decisions into another version of the recommendations draft as soon as possible, so that can be sent to the so that the city manager would send that to the city attorney and the labor lawyer. I think that's what we said last week, and I just kind of want to see if that's everybody's understanding.
Yes, I apologize. I just assumed that's exactly what we were doing. So but I'm glad you, paused that for a quick second there.
Okay.
We're waiting for Heroes.
Exactly. Cedric was going to write something. If it's possible to do that, even if it's not a final perfect version, get something in so that it can be included in what would go to the attorneys. That would be great.
I'll have it by Wednesday at the latest.
Okay. And Eric, you're going to do the redrafting, is that right?
Yes.
You have our massive appreciation.
So could I just ask quickly, is there any particular areas they're supposed to focus on? Are we expecting they're going to review the entire document? Because I just want to see what's the total length of the document? Is it 60 pages at this point, or is that without?
No.
I think it's only 38 or 40 pages.
40 pages. Okay. All right. Yeah, we've talked to both attorneys, and they are ready to receive it. They think they have from Tuesday or Wednesday to next Wednesday. And what they're going to do is they're going to not write an opinion letter, which would be too lengthy. They're going to, in the document, put comments, concerns, questions, issues, recommendations. whatever they see appropriate so that we can note areas of concern or things that have to be thought about, fixed, changed, whatever. So that's what I've asked them to do. And that's what I believe they can get done in that timeframe.
Thank you, City Manager Hannes, and that has been a formula that has worked for us before in the past. So we appreciate you making sure that that is how they're going to present that for us. So that's very helpful. Anything else, Vice Chair Root, that I did not capture before we move on or clarify?
That's great.
All right, so we're on to item 3.2, and as you can see there, we have the appendices to Police Oversight Report recommendations, and how do we fundamentally get this report to City Council? And so I'll go ahead and open it up to the Commission and Vice Chair Root in regards to how to go about this next section and how we get to the final report.
Well, I can start in a little bit. We have drafts of an introduction by Quentin Tyler, 2 chapters about East Lansing, one about data about policing and the other about the history of recent complaint review. Then we have a chapter from Cedric, which is the national context and some things we've learned from other cities. And then we have this recommendations chapter. And then I added this appendix, this attachment of a list of appendices as a reminder that there would be appendices and kind of as a stand-in for all the parts of the report. All the sections have been provided at various points along the way to the study committee and to the public by virtue of being attached to the agendas. Obviously, we've been working very hard on the recommendations the last couple of months. So I doubt that people have been poring over other parts of the report. I think at our next meeting, we want to have some way of getting input into any additions that are still needed or any concerns people have. And either at our next meeting or the one following that, which I think is our last meeting, we'll need to have some way of affirming, what we've gotten to as our report to council. So I think we would, next week we'll have the comments from the attorneys. And so we might do some more rethinking about the recommendations. So I think at the following meeting, we'll be making final decisions about the recommendations. And then we'll also need to, have a way of affirming the other parts of the report. And that's about as far as I've gotten in my thinking.
It's a lot further than mine. But I was wondering if any other commissioners want to respond and chime in on what you just heard and kind of has been laid out for how we do this. Yes, Commissioner Raw, please go ahead.
I was just wondering if we have a process in place for making sure that the report is consistent, by which I mean sort of stylistically. So it's not, footnotes in this chapter and endnotes in this chapter and comments in this chapter and, sort of an editing process, I guess.
Yeah. Well, stylistic consistency can certainly help so that people aren't stumbling over stylistic issues when they're trying to focus on substance. I am willing to be the person who would be responsible for that. You and I, fortunately, talked before either one of us put our fingers on the keyboard of our drafting and agreed that we would do footnotes. And I think that was extremely beneficial to both of us. So fortunately, we're already, in tune on that. There are subheadings in those chapters. I'm willing to do the work of making those consistent. I don't think that would be a really big task. And I could work on that, before the next meeting, if that would be helpful. That really is just style questions. I think obviously the recommendations chapter will be completely different from the others. We're not trying to have them be the same, or in fact, trying for them to be quite different. So that's okay. But chapters 1 through 4, it would be very good for them to flow well. We also, we're practically publishing a book, but we do not have the advantage of an editor and publisher for a book. So I think the council will realize that this is the product of 8 months of work by a volunteer group of people. So it's not going to be a perfect publication, but we'll try to not have it be something that people stumble over.
Any more comments or input on the process? All right, so we have a framework in play for how that's going to go then. Is everyone comfortable feeling that from this discussion, so we can go ahead and move on?
One thing I would appreciate people looking at before the next time we deal with the report is to take a look at this appendix list, which we've distributed before, but it's always been just as a last page of something else. See if you can think of really important content that either the council would benefit from having or members of the Oversight Commission would benefit from having, because this is a place for us to bring things together that we think would be helpful to have in a reference document. So if you think of things that you think are missing here, this is one way to do it, that I'd appreciate.
Thank you, Vice Chair Root, and everyone else in that discussion. All right, we'll go ahead and move forward, if that's okay with everyone. And we're down to new business, item 4.1, HRC Presentation Report. This comes from the members of the HRC wanting to understand and see, and maybe be able to look at, even though it's not perfect and it has not been, turned around quite yet from the city attorney, about, what we've been doing, and if they had any input on that, if, from or a presentation from someone from this group to that group. And I just wanted to see if anyone had any ideas or input about what I can put forward, or what one of the commissioners can put forward to the HRC in that presentation about what we are at and what we've done, and what we want to see happen going forward.
Chuck, can you say something about the timing of that?
Well, as far as the HRC meeting next week, yeah, so unfortunately, with the process of the city attorney and how that all needs to be turned around, the presentation is forced to be done next week, because by the time it gets all done, it'll be, hopefully out of our hands in a way that they have that product, and they won't have an opportunity to really, give us input in regards to maybe some things that may see from their perspective. So that's really the why that this is thrown on here. And I know it's kind of weird for some of us to see that, but this is very, very important, because this is really a transfer of responsibility that they've had the whole time to a new commission. I really want to make sure that we also have, just like the community input, that they also have input, or at least a process where they have an opportunity to look at what we're doing. And unfortunately, that's before it goes to the city attorney. And that's why that is there. Does that cover that,
Well,
Vice Chair?
just one other piece of information. The Human Rights Commission meets the first Wednesday of every month. So the first Wednesday of May, our recommendations will not be finished. The first Wednesday of June, we probably aren't meeting anymore after that. So the best we can do is give them an opportunity to see something the first Wednesday of May with an explanation of what the status is.
I think I was trying to say that, but
Yeah.
I don't know if it came out that clearly, but thank
Well,
you.
I'm not sure I heard what their schedule is. That was the only thing, that it's the first Wednesday of May.
So that'll be happening next week. If you know, you're hearing what we're saying, and then you process it later, I highly recommend any of you chime in and call in and speak to the group. You know, there's an opportunity to do that as well. If there's some things that we talked about tonight that you really feel are important enough to bring to that group and have them hear your concerns or input, that's what they're there for. And I'm sure they'd be more than willing to be happy to hear from you as well. So I just want to throw that out there because, you know, maybe some of the stuff that we discussed tonight was something that can be incorporated in some form or fashion. The more people understand kind of really what's important to you and us in this commission when it comes to the final piece of the recommendations that we have going forward. So if there is there any other input or comments or anything you want to speak to, Vice Chair, when it comes to this line item? All right. So I'll go ahead and volunteer myself, and possibly I'll have Vice Chair Rue help me out, and we'll just give them a brief explanation. Vice Chair Rue actually reminded me, we just don't want to dump it on them without them having an opportunity to kind of get a perspective of some of the different things that we've been doing. So then all of a sudden they don't really understand a lot of things. They're just asking questions. And so we'll lay it up for them in a way that hopefully will give them a perspective and be able to make a comment if they want to. So thank you so much. I'll go ahead and move on. Will you raise your hand, Commissioner Boyle? Okay. All right, I'll move to Commissioner announcements, item 5. Is there anything that any commissioners or council wanted to bring forward to the commission tonight? Vice Chair Root, go ahead.
Just to say, on the agenda item at our next meeting for the report, we will have attachments of each of the chapters plus the appendix list. And just to hope that, you know, you might be able to take time to see if you've got any concerns or, you know, things you've noticed there that are missteps or missing things.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Anyone else? Oh, before we move to adjournment, I know I'm cheesy sometimes, but I just really want to thank everyone. Tonight was very, very tough for me to do and go through a lot of this information and really tighten it down to where we're at now. And it wasn't easy. So I would suspect for some of us, it wasn't easy as well. And so I just really appreciate everyone who was able to kind of get through this and us get through this together. It's very important. I'm just very impressed by the ability for us to be able to work on these complex issues, longstanding issues, in a way that we're able to kind of really agree and understand and listen to others and get a final product out there. And I'm very proud to be able to work with you all in doing that. So I just want to say and acknowledge that. And I'll go ahead and move on to item 6 and look for an adjournment. Moved by Vice Chair Root. Is there a second to us adjourning for the evening? Seconded by Ellsworth Edison. Is there any discussion on adjourning? All those in favor, please say aye. Good night and take care. Thank you so much, everyone.